Welcome. My name is MrRhexx, and today's story is one of adventure and wonder. It's the story of a man known as the Dragonborn, a man who followed fate to the very ends of the world and came back, at least for a time. Problem is, for this story to be told, we need to go back a bit, back to a time of troubles where war raged between two sides. Why is this important, you ask? Because the resulting backlash of this war will have tremendous profound effects in Skyrim, effects that went on to influence the Dragonborn dramatically in its dealings. So listen up. On one side you had the Third Empire, though not so great this one was. At one point, this empire had conquered the entire continent, but now, having lost much of its power and influence, it reels and breaks as the remaining members struggle to keep united. It consisted of Cyrodiil, a rich, verdant land inhabited by humans of all kinds and creeds. Hammerfell, a land rich in mountains and deserts, inhabited by Redguards, dark-skinned humans. Skyrim, the lands of the north, filled with snow peaks and tundras, inhabited by the Nords, rugged and light-skinned humans. And High Rock, a varied land with forested peaks, hardy mountains, luscious grasslands, and big lakes. Home to the Bretons, the descendants of an intermingling of humans and elves of old. Basically, half-elves. On the other side of the conflict, you had the Aldmeri Dominion, a collection of provinces brought together by the Thalmor in order to propagate the idea of elvish superiority over men. The Aldmeri Dominion consists of the Somerset Isles, the beautiful lands of the High Elves, Valenwood, an enormous forest province filled with giant migratory tree cities, home to the Bosmer, the Wood Elves, and elsewhere, a land divided by two. The Badlands in the north, featuring deserts and crags, and the south, a land of dense jungles and woodlands, home to the Khajiit, a bestial race of cat-like humanoids. Humans versus elves. Classic, is it not? Traditional, really. The reasons for their struggle always changes, but rivals they always are. I would like to think that we would be different, you know? If elves existed, that is. That we would live in communion. Love thy neighbor, after all. But who am I kidding? Of course we wouldn't. The battle raged, and it was brutal. The elves, though, after all, proved to be victorious. In order to avoid the complete destruction of the Empire, they signed a peace treaty, though, of course, being the losing party in the proposition, they had to concede to a certain couple of things, most of which are unimportant to our story, but for one singular thing: the banning of Talos as a god. Talos, up to this point, was the god of man and war. He was a mortal, you see, like you and I. But unlike us, he conquered the known world. In fact, he was the one that created the Third Empire we recently just talked about. With his armies, he brought peace and prosperity to the continent. The humans believe that the gods of this world rewarded him for his accomplishments with a place by their side. Talos had ascended from simply being a mortal conqueror into a god. Of course, the elves always resented this. A man who had conquered their own cities and now was praised as a god. You have to understand that even though these provinces are very much separated and segregated, they all basically believe in the same gods. So having this newcomer rise in this way was contested by the elves. The Emperor, however, signed this to be as part of the peace treaty, and as such, Talos was banned from being worshipped. And now we're back to Skyrim, where everything I just talked about is crucial for the understanding of this story. The Nords. They are a traditional people, with powerful customs and a rich past. You see, the Nords have a particular heaven that is specifically designated for them, a holy place called Sovngarde. It is believed that any Nord who dies with honor gets to go to this heaven, regardless of how they live their lives. Do me this favor, and imagine for a second how it would feel like for you if you were guaranteed to go to an infinite existence. An existence of drinking, eating, sex, and laughter, merely for the simple notion of dying with honor. Of course, the first question would be, well, what does honor actually mean? But for the Nords, that is a very clear proposition. For honor to them has always been found in respecting one's ancestors and fighting. If you die fighting for what you believe to be right, then you're basically guaranteed an entrance into heaven. But what does this actually mean for the people in Skyrim then? Well, it means that giving up on a war that has now caused you to lose your god is completely unacceptable. For a Nord, accepting the banning of Talos instead of fighting to protect something you believe in literally means you will pass the rest of eternity as a wayward spirit in sadness, without your ancestors and family, and alone. You know where this is going, don't you? Of course you do. What always happens when you take someone's god away? A civil war. A faction of Nords leadered by a man named MrRhexx Stormcloak arose, with the purpose of liberating Skyrim from the Empire, so that they may pursue worship of Talos, and of course, so that they may self-rule like the olden days. The faction, known as the Stormcloaks, would fight against the Empire in many skirmishes within the Skyrim region, until a moment in time, a spectacular, unique moment in time, faded, some would say. A group of Stormcloaks were captured, Ulfric included. While on their way to the Executioner's block, however, a legend would rise. A mysterious individual whose purpose was yet to be ascertained. A person with no backstory, no family to speak of, was found wandering the area. Of course, the Empire captured said individual, thinking of him as Stormcloak. Really just wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe, just maybe, the precise moment in the perfect location. Let's start with the story of Elder Scrolls Skyrim.
Watch your tongue. You're speaking to Ulfric Stormcloak, the true High King.
Ulfric? The Jarl of Windhelm? You're the leader of the rebellion. But if they've captured you... Oh gods, where are they taking us?
I don't know where we're going, but Sovngarde awaits.
The Stormcloaks surmised that they were probably being taken all the way out of Skyrim and into Cyrodiil to make some kind of show of it. You know, to show the populace in the Imperial City what happens to traitors. To boost morale and such, when in reality the Empire was scared. Giving a trial to such a popular and empowered individual such as Ulfric Stormcloak would be tricky and definitely risky. Suffice to say, the Elvish Thalmor that now had free reign over the region, as per the peace treaty, were not happy with what was about to unfold.
Ulfric Stormcloak. Some here in Helgen call you a hero, but a hero doesn't use a power like the voice to murder his king and usurp his throne. You started this war, plunged Skyrim into chaos, and now the Empire is going to put you down and restore the peace.
The unceremonious decapitation of the traitor, hidden from view, would bolster the Empire and unite the region. And as the headsmen started chopping heads, it became the Dragonborn's turn to die. But prophecy has a way of intervening, or was it merely luck? A smarter person than me once said, prophecy tells what may be, not what it should be. But why am I even talking about prophecy? We have just started. Well, because what is about to unfold would prophesize the end of the world, the coming of something great and destructive.
What in oblivion is that?
Sentries, what do you see?
It's in the clouds!
Dragon!
Don't just
Out of nowhere, a dragon showed up, bringing with it obliteration and havoc. An unseen force of death, not found in centuries. The Nords used to be told of these creatures in children's stories, legends and myths, that one day dragons would come to devour the world. But nobody wanted to believe that they even existed. And now, the truth dawned, and it dawned in fire. The small town of Helgen was engulfed in flames as everyone ran for their lives. The miraculous arrival of this ancient creature had helped the Dragonborn and Ulfric Stormcloak escape from the Imperials, cementing the beginning of the legend of this era. I keep interrupting, and I apologize, though after this one we should be good for a while. We need to talk about what's canon and what's not. See, the world of Skyrim is huge, with a lot to do, a lot of people to help, and many possibilities for the Dragonborn. We will simply tell the story of what most certainly happened to the Dragonborn, the main story, for it is the one thing that we can most definitely say is canon, since it would be unrealistic and, to be quite frank, a little far-fetched for this individual to have done everything that there is to do in this province, without even mentioning the fact that most side quests would certainly contradict one another. The example in here, of course, is that the Dragonborn is helped to escape by either a Stormcloak soldier or an Imperial soldier, a choice made by the player. The choice in here will allow you to hear the respective narrative, of course, helping you empathize with their struggle, and will yield a quest to side with their side in the Civil War. It is believed that the Dragonborn took no sides in these conflicts, and was a neutral agent during this era. Whether that is actually true or not is not for us to really know, and highly debated. Do know that from now on I will try and stay within the purview of the main story, of what is canon. On that same boat, I would like to say it is very likely that the Dragonborn was a Nord. Not because we have a specific moment in the game where that becomes clear, but mostly from outside sources and gamer intuition. The marketing material for the game shows us what is most likely a Nord. When you create your character, it defaults to a Nord, and of course, much of the story makes more sense if you're a Nord. That being said, the Dragonborn was found and caught by the Imperials trying to cross the border. We don't know if he was leaving Skyrim or entering it, though regardless of his actual lineage, the game seems to allude that this is the character's first time in Skyrim, though that is also highly debated. Having barely escaped the wrath of the dragon, the Dragonborn was weakened, hurt, and hungry, with nowhere really to go in this vast region. However, with the help of a fellow escapee, he set out on his journey to Riverwood, a small village built on the eastern bank of the White River, in the hold of Whiterun. A small rural community that survives thanks to its prosperous lumber mill. A quick glance at this place, however, noted a very dangerous turn of events. Riverwood is defenseless. The houses appear to be made all out of wood, and there's only a small retinue of guards to protect this place. The dragon was also seen flying this way, which made the situation very dangerous. It is believed that the populace of Riverwood were very helpful to the Dragonborn, offering him and the other survivors food and supplies, but begging of him one favor. See, Skyrim is divided into 9 different divisions, each of them ruled by a Jarl in the city. Riverwood, as I mentioned before, is located in the hold of Whiterun, which is governed by the city of Whiterun and its Jarl, Balgruuf.
There is something you could do for me, for all of us here. The Jarl needs to know if there's a dragon on the loose. Riverwood is defenseless. We need to get word to Jarl Balgruuf in Whiterun to send whatever troops he can. If you'll do that for me, I'll be in your debt.
The people of Riverwood begged the Dragonborn to ask for help in Whiterun, for if the dragon were to attack this place, it would most certainly fall. And a lot of people would die. If only the Jarl were to know of their predicament, then he would most certainly send soldiers to help protect the town. And this is where the triumphant nature of the Dragonborn truly started to shine. He was, for all intents and purposes, a prisoner of the Imperials. It wouldn't have been crazy to think that he was gonna get arrested as soon as he entered an Imperial-owned city like Whiterun and told his story. But he did it anyways, saving and helping the people of Riverwood who had been so kind to him, who had offered him food and rest, was more important than his probable incarceration.
We'll pay whatever it takes, but we must have more swords for the Imperial soldiers.
I just can't fill an order that size on my own. Why don't you swallow that stubborn pride of yours and ask Yorland Greymane for help?
I'd sooner bend my knee to Ulfric's Stormcloak. Besides, Greymane would never make steel for the Legion.
Have it your way. I'll take the job, but don't expect a miracle.
Helgen, destroyed by a dragon. Hard to believe, isn't it?
Need a blade? You should talk to
We cannot
Adrian
afford
or
to
Forge.
act rash. My lord, please. This is no time for rash action.
What's the
I just
meaning
think
of
we
this
need more
interruption?
information before
Jarl
we-
Balgruuf is not receiving visitors.
Who's this then?
Well, that explains why the guards let you in. Come on then. The Jarl will want to speak to you personally.
So, you were at Helgen. You saw this dragon with your own eyes? By Ysmir, Irileth was right. What do you say now, Proventus? Shall we continue to trust in the strength of our walls? Against the dragon?
My lord, we should send troops to Riverwood at once. It's in the most immediate danger. If
The
that
Jarl of
dragon is
Falkreath
lurking in the
will
mountains...
view that as a provocation. He'll assume we're preparing to join Ulfric's side and attack him. We should not...
Enough! I'll not stand idly by while the dragon burns my hold and slaughters my people. There is another thing you could do for me. Suitable for someone of your particular talents, perhaps. Come, let's go find Farengar, my court wizard. He's been looking into a matter related to these dragons and rumors of dragons.
The appearance of dragons, however, was more than just problematic. It had seemed that the court wizard to Jarl Balgruuf had casually been investigating the dragons for quite some time, and turned out he was a little of a connoisseur in the matter. This presented quite an opportunity for both parties, as the Dragonborn was new in the area, needed work, and seemingly was quite capable of handling himself against powerful foes, in this case, at least knowing full well how to escape from a rampaging dragon. On the other hand, the court wizard Farengar's secret fire had found himself stuck in a dead end on his research, for he needed to find an important old tablet found in an old Nordic dungeon, far too dangerous for him to delve. As soon as Jarl Balgruuf rewarded the Dragonborn for his services, he offered him more, if he were to help the city in this particular quest, which the Dragonborn happily accepted. The Dragonborn was tough, hardy, and capable. However, he was about to delve deep into an old Draugr-infested dungeon. This is, of course, not unheard of, for many adventurers and bandits seek out the riches in these kinds of places. Locations closed up centuries ago, probably with tons of treasure and gems to plunder, however dangerous they are.
I'm not surprised you've never heard of it. Even I used to think it was just a myth. But not anymore. The Dragon War was a real event, although only the barest glimmer of the actual events has come down to us. Far back in the Mythic era, the dragons were worshipped as gods in Skyrim. Many of the monumental ruins that still dot the landscape were in fact built as temples to the dragons. The details are lost, but at some point the Nords rebelled. After a long and terrible war, the Nords overthrew their dragon overlords.
What you find deeper inside, however, is the real problem. What is known in Skyrim as the Draugr. These type of undead are the remnants of the humans who used to venerate the dragons thousands of years ago. You see, the ancient Nordics used to worship what one would refer to as animal gods. The snake god, the eagle god, the bear god, you know, that sort of thing. But the dragon was always at the very top. In these ancient times, the dragons would rule Skyrim with impunity, using humans as slaves. The Draugrs, these ancient undead humans, are actually old servants that pledged their existence to the dragons, even after death. Note that the clergy of those ancient times lived in excellency. They were rich and powerful, for the dragons didn't actually want to bother ruling humans. They simply wanted to be atop mountains. They wanted big edifices to be constructed in their honor. They wanted to be feared, but they cared not for actual politics. And as such, the dragon priests used to rule in their stead. These Draugrs are not the priests, but merely the servitors to the priests. And what they do inside here is spend their eternity cleaning up the place and using whatever energy they might have to infuse the dragon priest within the complex in order to give it immortality. You see, legend says that the leaders of all dragons had such tremendous power that he could actually grant immortality. In essence, revive anything he wanted. So when the Dragon War happened and the humans rebelled against their masters, the dragon priest and all the humans that still had loyalty to the dragons, they buried themselves in these tombs and waited and waited, waiting for the time the Dragon Master would come and resurrect them. Thankfully, the Dragonborn did not find such a dragon priest in this dungeon, for that would have been a mortal enemy. They are extremely powerful. Instead, he found a powerful Draugr guardian, an individual that was granted the purpose of protecting the Dragonstone, a tablet dedicated to storing the information on where the dragons were being buried, as they were being killed by the humans of the time. Of course, with the intention of resurrecting them later when the Dragon Master would come back. But something happened at the end of the tomb. As he defeated the Guardian and claimed the tablet, something spoke to him. The wall spoke to him. What is described as a word wall is literally an enormous construction of stone with glyphs written on them. Various sentences that the Dragonborn could not understand, except for one word in the paragraph. This word stuck in the Dragonborn's mind, almost as if he could understand what the word was, and with it, the power that it carries. The word was force. See, the Dragonborn didn't know it at the time, but the word wall said, "Here lies the Guardian, keeper of Dragonstone, and a force of unending rage and darkness." Now, the word force in that paragraph had a strong meaning to him. Without truly understanding, though, what that meaning was, he set out back to Whiterun with his find.
I'm the commander of the guard here in Whiterun.
You see? The terminology is clearly First Era or even earlier. I'm convinced this is a copy of a much older text. Perhaps dating to just after the Dragon War. If so, I could use this to cross-reference the names with other later texts.
Good. I'm glad you're making progress. My employers are anxious to have some tangible answers.
Oh, have no fear. The Jarl himself has finally taken an interest, so I'm now able to devote most of my time to this research.
Time is running, Farengar, don't forget. This isn't some theoretical question. Dragons have come back.
Yes, don't worry. Although the chance to see a living dragon up close would be tremendously valuable. Now, let me show you something else I found. Very intriguing. I think your employers may be interested as well. Ah, yes, the Jarl's protege. Back from Bleak Falls Barrow. You didn't die, it seems. Ah, the Dragonstone of Bleak Falls Barrow. Seems you are a cut above the usual brutes the Jarl sends my way.
Farengar, you need to come at once. A dragon's been sighted nearby. You should come too.
The congratulations were to be cut short this time, however, for there were dire news of the Dragonborn's arrival. Upon delivering the Dragonstone, news were received of a dragon sighting very close to Whiterun, which prompted the Jarl to muster his forces and send a garrison of his troops to scout the menace. The group arrives to see the western watchtower on fire, with clear signs that a dragon had recently passed by. Contact is made with the surviving guards, but not long after that it's when it appears. Flying from across the mountains, the dragon made his appearance as it closed in on the warriors. His name was Mirmulnir. See, most dragons actually ended up dying during the Dragon War, knowing full well that their master would eventually resurrect them one day. This one, on the other hand, was one of the very rare exceptions, a dragon that survived. He has actually been out there alive all this time, making him literally one of the oldest dragons in the world. And now that dragons were returning, so did he seemingly, feeling safe enough to come out to hunt, which is actually his name ironically. His dragon name translates into Allegiance Strong Hunt. However, unlike his name, he fell to the likes of the Dragonborn who quelled his existence in this one fateful battle. See, this was a pivotal moment when the life of the Dragonborn shifted. He could have been anything, his future cloudy, filled with potential. Maybe the leader of the Thieves Guild, maybe a murderous cultist, or maybe he would have turned into the Archmage of Skyrim. But as he drew the last breath of the dragon, he felt his destiny pull inside of him, quite literally, as he absorbed the very soul of the dragon he just killed. Our escapee, our prisoner, the individual we had been following this entire time, turned out to be what these soldiers called him to be, a Dragonborn. The dream of every person, to wake up one morning with newfound powers. But would these be the powers that you would want? The ability to consume someone else's soul, to absorb their understanding, their knowledge, their abilities. See, there's an unspoken sadness about this, about what the Dragonborn actually does to these creatures. See, you gotta understand dragons, they are immortal. But I don't mean they don't age or get disease, I mean they literally exist forever. When a dragon dies, its soul simply continues existing in the material world, like a long sleep, simply awaiting to be awoken. The dragons have no concept of death. The idea of not being, of not existing, is completely alien to their brains, and as such, these creatures have been since the beginnings of time. In fact, the god of time in this world is believed to have created them. So what exactly gives the Dragonborn the right to end these endless existences? I mean, could you think of something sadder than destroying something ancient and primeval? The death of a god that has existed for millennia, for example. The destruction of a tree that has stood for thousands of years. The death of an old person, so wise and experienced. All of its life lessons, teachings, memories just gone. Forever. Well, in war, there are always sacrifices to be made. Though it is also believed that the very same god that created the dragons, the god Akatosh, the god of time, is the very same one that blesses those into becoming Dragonborn. Our hero, in this precise moment, discovers that he has been blessed by this god with the soul and mind of a dragon. And that's what this means, really. Our hero has the body and frailty of a human, but the mind and soul of a timeless dragon. Interesting, though, that this god would grant you the ability to annihilate his children, but alas, here we are, the last Dragonborn. The discovery of the Dragonborn was very quickly noticed by the Greybeards, an order of philosopher monks who live in isolation at the peak of Skyrim's largest mountain, a mountain called the Throat of the World. As the Dragonborn found his way back to Whiterun, having defeated Mjolnir, the entirety of Skyrim heard what sounded like the roar of a volcano, but what was actually the very words of these monks uttering the welcoming of a new Dragonborn into our midst. You see, the power of their voice is so vast that their mere shout could be heard miles and miles away all around the province. Upon reaching Jarl Balgrove with news of the success of the expedition, the Dragonborn explained what happened, what he felt, what he did, and what the others called him. A Dragonborn. Of course, this means, well, quite a lot to Nords. The legend of the Dragonborn is well known. In fact, Talos himself was a Dragonborn. The calling of the Greybeards was also well known to the Jarl, and he explained that this only meant one thing.
If you really are Dragonborn, they can teach you how to use your gift.
Didn't you hear the thundering sound as you returned to Whiterun? That was the voice of the Greybeards, summoning you to High Hrothgar. This hasn't happened in centuries, at least. Not since Tiber Septim himself was summoned when he was still Talos of Atmora.
Hrongar, calm yourself. What does any of this Nord nonsense have to do with our friend here? Capable as he may be, I don't see any signs of him being this, Dragonborn.
Nord nonsense? Why, you puffed up ignorant. These are our sacred traditions that go back to the founding of the First Empire.
Hrongar, don't be so hard on Avenici.
I meant no disrespect, of course. It's just that, what do these Greybeards want with him?
That's the Greybeards' business, not ours. Whatever happened when you killed that dragon, it revealed something in you, and the Greybeards heard it. If they think you're Dragonborn, who are we to argue? You'd better get up to High Hrothgar immediately. There's no refusing the summons of the Greybeards.
The Dragonborn had to make a pilgrimage all the way into the very top of the Throat of the World in order to meet these monks and train under them. In fact, it was considered quite a privilege to make the journey into the mountain. For you to understand that, of course, we're gonna have to need a little bit of context. The breath and the voice are the vital essence of a Nord. When they defeat great enemies, they take their tongues as trophies. See, the power of a Nord can be articulated into a dragon shout, and the strongest of these warriors are called tongues. When the Nords attack a city, see, they don't take any siege engines or cavalry. The tongues literally just form in a wedge in front of the gatehouse and draw in their breath. When the leader lets it out in a shout, the doors are blown in, and then the axemen rush into the city. These shouts can be used to sharpen blades or strike enemies. A common effect would be the one that knocks enemies back, or maybe even the power to command a person to do whatever you wish. A strong Nord can instill bravery in men with his battle cry, or stop a charging warrior with a roar. The greatest of the Nords can call to specific people over hundreds of miles, and can move by casting a shout, appearing where the shout lands. The most powerful Nords cannot speak without causing just utter chaos. They must go gagged and communicate through sign language or through scribing runes. The further north you go into Skyrim, the more powerful and elemental the people become, and the less they require dwellings and shelters. Wind is fundamental to Skyrim and the Nords. Those that live in the far wastes always carry a wind with them. is what people say. Nords consider themselves to be children of the sky. That's why this place is called Skyrim. They call the mountain the throat of the world because it is where the sky exhaled the north winds onto the land and formed them. They literally believe this is where the gods created the world and life. It all happened via a massive breath made by the goddess Kinnereth, what is known as the goddess of nature, winds, heaven, and sometimes life. That's why Kinnereth is so important to the Nords. She is the goddess of the air, of the sky, and this is where life started, at least according to them. What I'm trying to say here is that this place has strong significance to the Nords, and the people that live up there, the Greybeards, the monks, they are tongues. They can shout things into existence. They can do all those things I just mentioned and more. Ulfric Stormcloak is actually a tongue as well, which is why he was gagged during his failed execution. Now, typically, training in the arts of the tongue is a process that takes decades, if not your entire life, in order to master. However, not for the Dragonborn. See, these shouts are actually dragon words. When a dragon breathes fire upon you, he's not doing it thanks to some gland on his throat that produces that fire. What he's doing instead is actually speaking to you. He's speaking the dragon word for fire, and by doing that, fire magically gets created and projected towards you from its mouth. When dragons fight each other, they're actually talking to one another. Debates between one of these dragons are battles as well. However, it's not just about learning what the word of power is. You don't just learn what the word for icy blizzard is in dragon language and then you can just cast it like that. No. The main problem here, and the reason it typically takes decades to learn a single word of power, is because you must understand what the word means first. Think for a second. What does water mean to you? Of course, probably the first thing you thought was the ocean or maybe the kitchen faucet at your home. Maybe a glass of water? But let's be a little bit more introspective here though. What does water really mean? It's in everything. It really is everything. You are literally mostly water. The world is actually mostly water. But that's not the point. You can rationalize what it means to you as a human, but what makes it so difficult is that you have to understand it like a dragon understands it. Maybe to a dragon, water means weakness. See, that's where the power comes from. That's why it takes so long to master. Someone can't just tell you how to think about water and have it work just like that. You literally have to change the way your brain interprets its concepts. Mold your brain into thinking like a dragon. And that's why it is so easy for the Dragonborn to learn these shouts, because his brain is already a dragon's brain. You are already a dragon inside of you. Of course, these were all things that the Greybeards went on to teach the Dragonborn. The power of the voice and how to learn the words. The Dragonborn had learned that he alone had the ability to absorb the souls of dragons, and with it, their understanding of their language, a factor that he could use to project their powerful shouts. However, the Greybeards are a very special kind of tongue. They are actually extreme pacifists. See, they practice what they call the way of the voice, which is quite simply the art of using these shouts only for the worship of the gods, and never for combat. This is the main reason why the Greybeards don't actually really teach people how to use these shouts, for this kind of power typically lends itself to be used in combat. The Dragonborn, however, is a special case, for the appearance of a Dragonborn is ominous, and, well, to put it bluntly, it's kind of a big deal. The last Dragonborn before this one, after all, ended up uniting the world, produced world peace, and literally became a god, so you know, kind of a big deal. The Dragonborn ended up learning quite a bit about his powers during this meetup with the Greybeards, however his training was not yet complete. He needed to complete a task using everything that he had learned. The task being to go into an ancient burial tomb called Ustengrav, where the body of Jurgen Windcaller was interned. See, Jurgen Windcaller was the creator of the Greybeards, known at the time as the strongest tongue in the world. The quest was simple: to go into the tomb, collect an artifact of his, a special horn, and deliver it back to the Greybeards, and then they would allow him to finish his training. But things are never that simple. At the very end, finally, when the Dragonborn was supposed to find the artifact, there was instead a letter. It had seemed that someone had taken the horn and instead planted a note for the Dragonborn to read. Someone calling themselves a friend. Whoever it was knew that the Dragonborn was to come here. But alas, he needed that artifact, and as such he followed the directions of the note in order to see who this mysterious person was. The directions took our Dragonborn back into the very start of things, back to Riverwood. It had seemed that the tavern wench of the Sleeping Giant Inn was actually more than just that. Her name was Delphine, and she seemed to know quite a lot about Oz, and what was happening with the world around us. The dragons, the Dragon War, everything. The big thing was, though, that she didn't seem to think that dragons were simply coming back. She seemed to believe the dragons were coming back to life. Of course, we knew that the Master of Dragons potentially had the ability to do that, to resurrect others, but it seemed now to be written in stone. In fact, quite literally. The stone we had previously found in Bleak Falls Barrow was indeed a map of dragon burials, and with that, Delphine had managed to track down a pattern of resurrections by visiting these mounts. Indeed, Delphine was that stranger back then talking with Farengar. Farengar had given her the stone, and with it, she discovered that whoever was resurrecting these dragons was doing such starting from the south of Skyrim and going counterclockwise all the way into the north. And if that pattern held, the next dragon burial mound would be found in a tiny place called Kynes Grove, and if we hurried, we could potentially find out who or what was doing these resurrections. There was most definitely more to the story than just this, for Delphine knew way too much to be a simple warrior with a grudge. She had hatred for the Thalmor that was beyond reasoning, and she seemed very highly trained, but she didn't trust the Dragonborn, at least not until he proved that he was indeed one, by absorbing the soul of the resurrected dragon that they were about to meet. The only thing she did say was that she came from an organization that had been looking for a Dragonborn for a very, very long time. Very curious. Seeking answers, the Dragonborn set out with Delphine to corner this entity and find out the truth about the comings of dragons in this age. But he would never believe what he would find there.
Salokunir, Zil Grotova Ursa. Sled, fall.
Let's watch and wait. This is worse than I thought.
Alduin Thuri, Boantid Vokri Hasrixejun Kuzig. Ger Salokunir, Kalimir. Follusai Dovakin, Zuu, Korav Nid Nol Dove to hide. You do not even know our tongue, do you? Such arrogance, to dare take for yourself the name of Dova. Zalukanir, Kridar Jur.
The very same dragon that saved him that fateful day back in Helgen, the massive big black dragon that destroyed the town, was the one resurrecting these creatures. Clearly these dragons were listening to his commands and following this leader of sorts, but who he was, what he was still unknown to him. The Dragonborn had failed to stop this monstrosity, but he had earned an ally. After absorbing a dragon soul directly in front of Delphine, she believed, now finally, that he was indeed a Dragonborn. And with these cuffs off, she was free to tell you everything about who she was, what her mission is, and why you needed her. See, Delphine was a blade. The Blades are an ancient organization of dragon slayers meant to protect the Emperor. You see, typically when a Dragonborn is discovered, he becomes the Emperor of the Empire. His descendants are also then considered Dragonborn, though really only in title. They don't actually possess the soul and mind of a dragon. See, since the Blades are the protectors of the Emperor, they are also entitled the Protectors of the Dragonborn. Their full name is actually the Imperial Intelligence Service and the Dragon Guard, which is fancy speak for basically protectors of the Dragonborn Emperor, dragon slayers, and spies. This is why Delphine was so well trained in the arts of subtlety and misdirection. She was trained since she was a little girl to be the perfect spy for the Empire. The Blades, however, being sort of like the assassins and the spies of the Empire, they bubbed heads quite often with the Thalmor, them being the enemies of the Empire. Once the peace treaty between the two was brokered, one of the many things that had to go was the Blades. In fact, the Blades were hunted down mercilessly and brutally. No survivor was allowed, which is why Delphine had to be so careful. The Dragonborn needed her, however, for the Blades had extensive knowledge on how to deal with dragons, but the first point of action was figuring out why this was all happening. Who was that black dragon? Why was it doing all of this now of all times? And of course, the best guess was the Thalmor. If there are dragons flying around, creating havoc and destruction, then Skyrim gets hurt. If Skyrim gets hurt, then the Empire gets hurt. If the Empire needs to continue to funnel resources into Skyrim, that means less resources for Cyrodiil, which means the Thalmor wins. See, the Great War between the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion is not quite over. The peace treaty is merely a ceasefire. Everyone knows that the true war is still coming, which led Delphine to believe that the Thalmor must be behind all of this somehow, and a plan to figure out if this was true or not was to be concocted.
Ah, you've retrieved the horn of Jörgen Windcall. Well done. You have now passed all the trials. Come with me. It is time for us to recognize you formally as Dragonborn.
And so it began. As the Dragonborn returned back to the Greybeards to finish his training, Delphine worked her magic on a plan. Neither side had it easy, for the last teachings that the Greybeards had to offer the Dragonborn were excruciating, for he needed to survive the unrelenting shouts of all the Greybeards together, what had become a little bit of a tradition since the very days of Jörgen Windcaller, the original creator of the Greybeards. See, Jörgen wanted to use the voice for peace, and he came up with the idea of the Way of the Voice, which was the concept of only using the shouts to honor the gods. Many disagreed with his position, and many challenged him. In fact, it is said that 17 tongues actually shouted at him for 3 days straight until they collapsed exhausted. That's how powerful he was. All 17 tongues vowed to follow him and became his first disciples. The shouts that they used on the Dragonborn were of course draconic, but they translated to, "Long has the storm crown languished with no worthy brow to sit upon. By our breath we bestow it now to you in the name of Kine, in the name of Shore, and in the name of Admora of old. You are Ismir now, the dragon of the north. Hearken to it."
Dovahkiin, You have tasted the voice of the Greybeards and passed through unscathed. High Hrothgar is open to you.
Now there's quite a bit to unpack here. See, there hasn't been a Dragonborn since the time of Tiber Septim, of course, known now as Talos, who united the continent and brought peace to all. The name Ysmir is basically Talos. It's a title given by Nords to refer to the aspect of Talos. I should say more directly, it actually translates into Dragon of the North. Okay, maybe I should also explain that. Many believe, including the Nords, that they all came originally from the lands north of Skyrim, if you can actually believe that there is something north of here. There is. It is a small continent called Admora, which is basically just a frozen wasteland now. The title, Dragon of the North, is a play on words, since only humans come from the north. It is actually believed that the birthplace of dragons was Akavir, which is a completely different continent that really has no place in this story, but it is found east of Tamriel. The point is, the human who also turns out to be of dragon blood is titled Ysmir, the one destined to wear the Storm Crown. Now this can be taken in multiple ways. Some argue that the Dragonborn is actually an avatar of Talos, sent into the world to prevent its destruction and to bring peace. Others claim that the Crown of Storms is just quite literally that, the fact that constant shouting from the Dragonborn is said to bring clouds of thunder that constantly fly atop its head. This was something that actually happened to Tiber Septim once he became the Dragon of the North. It is said that clouds of raging thunder would follow him constantly, and that nobody could see him without actually seeing a dragon in his stead. But now the ceremony was complete, and the Dragonborn had survived the training. All that was left now was to try and discover who was this Black Dragon, and what plan had Delphine worked on this whole time. Delphine's target was the Thalmor Embassy in Skyrim, a place where she figured there would be secretive information stored that they could use to solve this mystery. Problem was, attacking the place head-on would not just be incredibly dangerous, but would allow the Thalmor enough time to burn all the evidence and whatever piece of sensitive information that they would have stored there. So what they did instead is Delphine forced an invitation into a party that was scheduled to happen in the embassy, where the Dragonborn would pretend to be a diplomat. Using the help of an insider called Malborn, the Dragonborn managed to stash in his armor and weapons deep in the kitchens of the embassy. This allowed him to get into the dungeons of the place without being caught. After rummaging through the place, it had seemed that the Thalmor didn't actually do anything. They were not the ones to blame for the chaos that was spreading through Skyrim, which was honestly quite surprising. In fact, they were actively trying to figure out who had unleashed these dragons about, which were causing all kinds of trouble for everyone. What the Dragonborn found down there instead, however, was very useful. The Thalmor had a dossier for a Blade member that apparently Delphine thought to be dead, a very old dragon lore master from the Blades. This was precisely what they needed. I mean, if anyone were to know anything about this insanely powerful black dragon, it would be him. Problem was, he was missing, though it had seemed that the Thalmor were very close to finding him. He was last seen in the city of Riften.
I had another run-in with the Thieves' Guild.
Be careful, Mule. The Thieves Guild has Maven Blackbriar at her back. One snap of her fingers and you could end up in Riften jail. Or worse.
They represent the reason I'm here. I can't just ignore them, Eren.
I know. I just don't want you to leave. You're the only good thing that's happened to this city in a long time.
If you're looking for a handout, you'll want to speak with my husband. If you're looking for company, I suppose I could do worse. Bolly's around somewhere, planning to feed the poor with his nonsense about Mara.
I don't know you. You in Riften looking for trouble? Yeah? Well, I got news for you. There's nothing to see here. Last thing the Blackbriars need is some stranger sticking their nose where it doesn't belong. The Blackbriars have Riften in their pocket, and the Thieves Guild watching their back, so keep your nose out of their business. Me? I'm Maul. I watch the streets for him. If you need dirt on anything, I'm your guy. But it'll cost you.
Oh, Riften. You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. The place is actually run by literally everyone else but the actual Jarl. The Blackbriar clan owns basically most of the city, and they are incredibly corrupt. Their main source of revenue being having monopoly over the Nord's favorite pastime, drinking. See, they own basically all of Skyrim's mead, which grants them tremendous influence in the province. But then you have the Thieves Guild, who does so happen to have their headquarters stationed directly below the city, in the underbelly. What I'm trying to say is that this place runs dark, though you wouldn't know it by simply looking at it. Its autumn vibe is gorgeous, the houses are neatly designed, and the harbor always flows with life. It's a mercantile town with a lot of energy and always with things to do. But it's the perfect place for someone who doesn't want to be found to hide, and that's what brought the Dragonborn here in the first place. If the Dragonborn was to find this lore master, he was going to need the help of the Thieves Guild, for they had control of the underbelly, and that was likely where this individual was going to be found. Now, it is not particularly known how much work the Dragonborn actually did for the Thieves Guild in order to get the information that he required. Some say he was made to steal. Some others say that he simply persuaded and bought the information. Others claim that he actually enjoyed participating in the heists given to him by them. Regardless of whatever the case might be, he did get the information he needed from them.
If you're looking for company, I suppose I could do worse.
Buying and selling
Protect
fine
yourself
jewelry
right.
here.
Buy armor.
Stay out of trouble, or there's gonna be trouble.
You'd better have coin to pay for your drinks. There's no handouts here. Huh. Lot of old guys around. I don't really know how I can help. Well, when you put it that way, I think I do know the old guy you're talking about. He's holed up in the Ratway Warrens. Hardly ever leaves the place. Has someone bring him food and such. Crazy old coot from what I've heard. For that to stand out down here, he must really be off his nut.
That information led him directly into the right spot. The Thalmor had actually closed in on their prey, and if it wasn't for the Dragonborn, well, I guess we don't have to worry about that since he managed to get there just in time to save him. The Blade Lore Master was none other than Esbern, a close colleague for Delphine, for they had worked together in the past. More than just any simple lore master, his focus was monitoring the ancient prophecies of Tamriel, especially those related to dragons and the Dragonborn. Really a very fortuitous discovery. And what was the first thing he said to the Dragonborn? Well, exactly this.
You should have acted. They're already here. The Elder Scrolls told of their return. Their defeat was merely a delay. To the time after Oblivion opened. When the sons of Skyrim would spill their own blood. No one wanted to believe they even existed. And when the truth finally dawns, it dawns in fire. But there's one they fear. In their tongue, he's Dovahkiin, Dragonborn.
The scrolls have foretold of black wings in the cold. that when brothers wage war come unfurled, Alduin, bane of kings, ancient shadow unbound, with a hunger to swallow the world. But a day shall arise when the dark dragon's lies will be silenced forever, and then fair Skyrim will be free from foul Alduin's maw. Dragonborn, the savior of men. Whew, what a name, what a legend, and a prophecy. Esbern was everything that was promised to us and more, for he knew so much about Alduin and the stories behind him. Alduin, the leader of dragons, the chief in the pantheon of the ancient Nords, literally considered a god. Ancient scriptures tell of him destroying the last world in order to create this one, an inescapable fate that tied him to existence. A being meant only for the destruction of his own creations, only to begin the cycle anew once again. Believed to be the first creation of Akatosh, the god of time, and the prime chieftain of most religions. He ruled not only over dragons but also over men millennia ago. It was foretold by Elder Scrolls that the coming of Alduin would herald the destruction of the world, and that only one person could stop it. A person who was kin to both Worm and the races of man. A person with the power to rival the sun, who could shout and cut through all enemies. Of course, the person we know as the Dragonborn. Esbern, with his knowledge of legends, showed us into an ancient blade temple that has stood for thousands of years. A temple built by his order back when they were still slaying dragons in the old Skyrim. It had seemed that the old blades knew that Alduin was going to return at some point, so they recorded everything they knew about the creature and dragons in this temple. The Dragonborn had reached a dead end. Alduin was defeated once, back in the Dragon War when the humans rebelled against their dragons. The murals in the temple didn't describe how exactly it was done, only that the ancient tongues of the time had used a very special kind of shout in order to bring Alduin down. This was all the Dragonborn had to go along with, some kind of secret weapon that needed to be discovered. But what shout could destroy a dragon? Not even a normal one, but a godlike dragon. I mean, shouts are dragon words, aren't they? Why would they have a word in their own language that could be so devastating for them? Maybe they used to kill each other, and this is how they did it. Or maybe this is how Alduin keeps all the dragons in line. You know, with a word that can kill even such a mighty creature. I guess we'll find out. When questions of the voice came to the Dragonborn, he knew just the right order to ask. Of course, he would go straight to the Greybeards. However, by then, it had become quite clear to the Greybeards that the path the Dragonborn was walking was one of war and battle. His destiny was clear to him. He needed to fight. Not necessarily for the gods, not necessarily for even himself. He needed to, for that was his destiny. Moreover, the shout he was asking to learn was a shout of evil. This shout was created by humans, specifically to be used against dragons. Their understanding of the word came from a place of misery, for they had suffered unimaginable pain under the constraints of their dragon overlords. For the Dragonborn to learn this shout, he would have to understand how they felt. He would have to feel the way those Nords felt at that precise moment. Dangerous, that is, of course. Dangerous for the ultimate killer of dragons to feel not indifference, not reverence nor respect for this race, but complete joy at their destruction. That's how he would have to feel in order to obtain this shout. For in what other way could he even come close to understanding its meaning? This posed a tremendous problem for the Greybeards, for they walked a path of peace, and putting the Dragonborn on a hell-bent crusade against the dragons, it would just be against their creed. Furthermore, they didn't actually know the words in this shout, for it never needed to be used more than once. The progenitors of its creation used it against Alduin, and then left the words to be forgotten for all eternity, for they knew not of Alduin's return. But knowing this word of power, will it be enough? Clearly the Dragonborn will have to sacrifice quite a bit, even to learn this shout. And will it even do anything? The ancient tongues used the words, and it didn't matter. Alduin is back, here, and now. So what was the point? Well, the Dragonborn does have something they didn't, doesn't he? The ability to absorb the soul of a dragon. But could he absorb the soul of a god? Now that would be tremendous power. There was only one entity who could help the Dragonborn learn this power. Paarthurnax. At the very top of the throat of the world rested the actual leader of the Greybeards, someone not mentioned up until now. But it had seemed that the Greybeards thought this to be the opportunity for them to finally meet, an individual they protected at all costs, wondering why the Dragonborn scaled the mountain to meet this mysterious Greybeard. The shocker was, the leader wasn't actually a Nord, or a human, or a humanoid for that matter. Paarthurnax was a dragon.
Dremyolok, greetings, Wundernik. I am Paarthurnax. Who are you? What brings you to my Strunmach, my mountain? I am as my father Akatosh made me, as are you, Dovahkiin. Tell me, why do you come here, Volan? Why do you intrude on my meditation?
The lieutenant of Alduin in the Great Dragon War, Paarthurnax committed and witnessed unspeakable atrocities against mankind. However, during the peak of humankind rebelling against their overlords, he rebelled as well, betraying his master and instead choosing to help the slaves. In fact, he did more than just that, for he was the one that actually gave the Nords the ability to use the voice as a weapon. Oh, and that they did. They developed the now long forgotten shout known as Dragonrend, a shout that for a mere couple of seconds allows dragons to understand their mortality and be crippled by this realization. It basically forces them to land on the ground and prevent them from flying for enough time to be killed. Unfortunately, this shout cannot be learned by dragons. Their minds are just not equipped to handle the understanding of mortality, and hence, Paarthurnax cannot teach it to the Dragonborn. He, however, knows of a very special way of obtaining it, as the actual defeat of Alduin incorporated more than just using the shout. The ancient tongues needed to use the namesake of this series, an Elder Scroll. I'll let Paarthurnax handle this one.
Do you know why I live here, at the peak of the Monavin, what you name Throat of the World? True, but few now remember that this was the very spot where Alduin was defeated by the ancient tongues. Varucht Unslad. Perhaps none but me now remember how he was defeated. Yes and no. Viknusnikaron. Alduin was not truly defeated either. If he was, you would not be here today seeking to defeat him. The Nords of those days used the Dragonrend shout to cripple Alduin, but this was not enough. Okmulag Unslad. It was the Kell, the Elder Scroll. They used it to cast him adrift on the currents of time. how to explain in your tongue. The Dove have words for such things that Jor do not. It is an artifact from outside time. It does not exist, but it has always existed. Rahwalan. They are fragments of creation. The Kele, Elder Scrolls as you name them, they have often been used for prophecy. Yes, your prophecy comes from an Elder Scroll. But this is only a small part of their power. Zofa Suyek. Not intentionally. Some hoped he would be gone forever, forever lost. Meye. I knew better. Tidbo Amativ. Time flows ever onward. One day, he would surface. Which is why I have lived here. For thousands of mortal years, I have waited. I knew where he would emerge, but not when.
These objects, known as Elder Scrolls, are the most enigmatic objects in the entire series, capable of doing just about anything. For the most part, they seem to be famous for their ability to predict what could happen in the future. In this case, however, MrRhexx explains to the Dragonborn that the Old Nords managed to remove Alduin from existence by using one of these special scrolls, after failing to slay him by simply using the Dragonborn shout. They casted him adrift in the currents of time. However, time always and ever flowing forward, MrRhexx deduced that it was just a matter of time until Alduins would come out at the end of the time hole in the future. And this explains why the ancient tales of the Nordic people saw the return of Alduin as a legendary end of the world, for they knew that it was gonna happen, and they knew that if not even the ancient tongues, the legendary heroes of old, could slay him, then what chance did we have now? This didn't particularly help the Dragonborn since he still didn't have the shout, but MrRhexx explained that what the ancient Nords did back then sort of ruptured time and space at the top of this mountain. For it was right here that Alduin was cast adrift. He figured that if we had access to an Elder Scroll, it was entirely possible that we could use that distortion to see through it, and just like a movie, experience the events that unfolded that fateful night, which in turn would allow the Dragonborn to see the shout being used and learn from it. And with that, a new quest was presented for the Dragonborn: the acquisition of an Elder Scroll. The world was vast, his quest important, but his tenacity was absolute. The Dragonborn seeked out a legendary artifact of untold power all throughout the cold landscape of the north. Seeking advice from both the Greybeards and the Blades, he was directed to the only place he could harbor a wealth of information big enough to find this treasure. He was directed to the Guild of Mages in Skyrim, a place called the College of Winterhold. You see, the library of the college was well known to many in this region as one of the few places in Skyrim where knowledge could be stored safely and with great care. One of the biggest reasons is because to even gain admittance into this proud college, one must boast considerable magical proficiency, a problem the Dragonborn did not have by mere merit of his inheritance, his dragon blood. Just by showing that he was indeed Dragonborn, the college allowed him in with free reign upon its grounds. Upon studying some of the ancient texts in the library within, the Dragonborn found a peculiar fellow with an enormous interest in Elder Scrolls, an Imperial going by the name of Septimus Sickness. It had seemed that his book had gathered the interest of the Dragonborn, and he was set on finding him. At the moment, this Septimus was living in isolation in the middle of an enormous iceberg north of the college, not very far off. There was only one problem. He was a little crazed.
When the top level was built, no more could be placed. It was and is the maximal apex. Elder Scrolls, indeed. The Empire. They absconded with them, or so they think. The ones they saw. The ones they thought they saw. I know of one. Forgotten. Sequestered. But I cannot go to it, not poor Septimus, for I have arisen beyond its grasp. Here. Well, here as in this plain. Mundus, Tamriel, nearby, relatively speaking. On the cosmological scale, well, it's all nearby.
The price of power sometimes is your own mind. Every time you read an Elder Scroll, you lose part of yourself. Sometimes the tax is merely your eyesight. Sometimes it is your mind. Sometimes your life. Such is the burden that one must take upon themselves to learn the truth about reality, to obtain that which shouldn't be obtained. Of course, we fickle creatures always try to anger the gods, to find ways to obtain said wisdom while avoiding its repercussions. There was a race like such in here, a group of elves called the Dwemer. They were essentially a race of extremely advanced elves that lived below the earth. They committed the crime of inventing a way to read these scrolls without their associated sufferings. They also mocked the gods. They invented their own magic. They created robotic entities. They enslaved an entire race like dogs. Every sacrilegious note in the book they attempted. And now they're gone. Nobody knows where they are, what happened to them. Almost as if they just evaporated into the thin air. Every single one of them. Gives you a lot to think about, huh? Have to be careful what you do around angry gods. It had seemed that reading a few Elder Scrolls in his youth had turned Septimus a little aloof, a little different. However, he still considered himself an expert on the subject of Elder Scrolls, but more importantly, he knew how to get one. He wanted us to go to Blackreach. See, the ancient Dwemer, before their disappearance, had built enormous cities below the earth. Cities that connected themselves through a giant complex known as Blackreach. In the olden days when the Dwemer were still around, they had found a special mineral known as Ethereum. A mineral that was incredibly magically sculptable. What I mean is, they could create very powerful magical items with this ore. However, there were many different Dwemer lords that wanted access to this mineral, and to avoid infighting, they decided to all build their cities around this Ethereum gold mine, where each city would have a job in the production of magical items. That way, every city would be necessary for the production of the items, and infighting would cease. Now, how is that even relevant? It is, because it means that basically every Dwemer ruin leads into Blackreach. Septimus told the Dragonborn where to look, a Dwemer ruin far deeper than Blackreach, which meant the Dragonborn would have to fight through an entire Dwemer ruin, only to find Blackreach and fight his way through it, only to then keep going further down into yet another Dwemer ruin, in order to find the Elder Scroll. His work, to say the least, was cut out for him. His greatest challenge yet, since he was no longer fighting simple undead draugrs and poisonous spiders anymore. He was fighting the robotic creations of an ancient technological race alongside the forgotten slaves of said race, who were now blind and murderous. See, the Falmer, the weird elvish-looking creatures that the Dragonborn found under the depths of the Dwemer ruins, used to be the Snow Elves, an old proud race of elves who used to live in Skyrim before the humans ever even came here. They had a war with the humans and lost. And as they ran away into the depths of the earth seeking help from the Dwemer instead enslaved them and poisoned them with shrooms that made them blind. They and the robots are all that's left of that time. The fighting was rough, even encountering one of the greatest creations of the Dwemer for all-out warfare, a Dwemer Centurion. Shocking, really, the level of technology that this race managed to accrue. The ability to grant perpetual permanent energy into a construct to make it last for thousands of years. Of course, the story gets even darker when you look deep into their cores, realizing it is all soul energy. The Dwemer used the souls of living creatures to power these automatons, further dropping them deeper and deeper into their sinful despair. The battle was done, however, and the Dragonborn had found the lexicon where the Elder Scroll was resting. A beautiful construct designed to read an Elder Scroll without incurring any of its negative factors. A very long trek, and extremely hard fought, but the Dragonborn had his price. It was now time to go back into the throat of the world, the greatest and tallest mountain in Skyrim, to glimpse into the past and obtain the shout that will hopefully bring Alduin to his knees.
You have it. The Kell, the Elder Scroll. Tidkrech Kalos. Time shudders at its touch. There is no question. You are doom-driven. Kogan Akatosh. The very bones of the earth are at your disposal. Go then, fulfill your destiny. Take the scroll to the Time Wound. Do not delay. Alduin will be coming. He cannot miss the signs.
Gormley! We're running out of time. The battle...
The Arsunthurse Alduin Ukri. Today, Alduin's lordship will be restored. But I honor your courage. Krifwolf Akrin. Die now in vain.
It had worked. The plan had worked. With the usage of the Elder Scroll, the Dragonborn's mind went back in time to the moment of Alduin's defeat to see with his own eyes the usage of this mighty shout.
Alduin approaches.
So be it.
Meye, Tarodis, Ani, Him Hind Paliv, Zuu Hindan.
Let those that watch from Sovngarde envy us this day.
What have you done? What twisted words have you created? Tarodis Parthenax, my teeth to his neck.
The words were said, and now the Dragonborn knew them. Yursafrul, mortal, finite, temporary. Alien and painful concepts for a dragon's mind to understand, and now it was his weapon against Alduin. The usage of the Elder Scroll, however, and the scrying of the Time Wound created enough power that even Alduin could sense it.
Silesur, my belly is full of the souls of your fellow mortals, Dovahkiin. Die now and await your fate in Sovngarde. Lost Funt, you are too late, Alduin. Dovahkiin, use Dragonrend if you know it.
It was time for the Dragonborn to test his newfound power as Alduin flew up across the sky. The kin to both worm and man, and the betrayer of dragons versus the World Eater. A legendary battle in its own right. The Dragonrend shout showed Alduin that his reign in Skyrim was going to be hard-fought and dangerous, and that not even an army of dragons was going to make this easy for him. Like the Dragon War, Dragonrend crippled Alduin enough for the Dragonborn to strike a few good blows, and unlike the Dragon War, Alduin was actually bested.
Use Dragonrend is the only chance to defeat him. But I am Alduin, firstborn of Akatosh, Malagi Zoklat. I cannot be slain here by you or anyone else. You cannot prevail against me. I will outlast you, mortal.
Unfortunately, closing in on a powerful dragon is difficult, especially on a demigod. Alduin's resilience is near perfect, his strikes dangerous, and his willpower legendary. He is definitely affected by the Dragonrend shout, but not quite as a normal dragon is. He seemingly having the ability to resist his effects after a while, and like that, Alduin managed to escape. This was a big problem, for now Alduin knew that the Dragonborn was able to defeat him in open combat, which meant he wasn't going to allow open combat to happen again, otherwise risking his actual death. And because of that, Alduin went hiding. For as long as he was out there somewhere, dragons would continue to be resurrected and Skyrim, no, all of the world would be in danger. So the Dragonborn needed to do something, even though his options were very limited. MrRhexx, however, had a fantastic idea, for he understood the dragons very well, of course him being one of them. He figured that Alduin, having suffered such a defeat, would most definitely cripple the loyalty that his dragon minions would have for him, since dragons more than anything respect power over all. And the power of the Dovahkiin, of the Dragonborn, was greater than that of Alduin. If only they could defeat and capture a dragon without killing it, could they persuade it to betray Alduin and join the Dragonborn's cause. For only one of Alduin's warriors would know of his hiding location. It was a good plan, though it was going to be fairly tricky. Holding down a dragon enough to actually interrogate it and persuade it is near impossible, for there is nothing that they detest more than being held and constricted. Thankfully, there was a place designed to hold and incarcerate a dragon, and the owner of that place happened to be an ally of the Dragonborn, our old friend Balgruuf, Jarl of Whiterun. See, the castle of the Jarl is named Dragonsreach because it actually used to hold a captive dragon, a dragon called Numinex, who was captured and held as a trophy. So the entirety of the balcony of his castle was made and suited for this one purpose, including the harness that was used to hold said dragon. It was perfect. Or rather, it would have been perfect if Balgruuf would have been as enthusiastic about this plan as the Dragonborn was. See, as we have been following the story of the Dovahkiin in his quest of understanding himself, his destiny and his fate, the world kept on going in the background, and the war between the Stormcloaks and the Imperials grew fiercer and fiercer. Whiterun happens to be the only hold that hasn't taken a side in the conflict, which meant every possible guard and soldier in Whiterun needed to be prepared for any eventuality, as it seemed that Jarl Ulfric, leader of the Stormcloaks, was actually getting ready to potentially invade and conquer Whiterun. What I mean to say is, Jarl Balgruuf had a lot to worry about without even adding a potential dangerous dragon to the equation. If by any measure this dragon failed to be incarcerated or broke off from its spines, then it would completely destroy the city, or in the least, it would injure many soldiers, an event that Jarl Ulfric would use to his advantage in order to invade. It was here, where the power and influence of the Dragonborn truly showed. You can be great at killing monsters and dragons. You can be persuasive, and history can have all its glory tied to your back. But get in the middle of an emperor's war, and the emperor will simply slay you. It was here, when the Dragonborn needed to stop this civil war, even if just for a small moment. A moment long enough to allow him to use Whiterun in his plan to catch a dragon. After much deliberation, the Greybeards accepted the responsibility of hosting a peace talk between both warring parties in order to get a ceasefire in this war. Many thought it would be impossible for them to find common ground on this, but with the threat of Alduin looming large, it behooved everyone for the Dragonborn to succeed. Every Nord that died thanks to the dragons was a Nord lost to Skyrim and lost to the Stormcloaks. See, in the hypothetical future where they defeat the Empire, they would have to defend themselves against the Thalmor, all by themselves. And if the entirety of Skyrim was burning, well, it didn't really leave much of a future for them. On the Empire side, basically the same reasoning. The weaker Skyrim is, and the more people die during this conflict, the weaker the Empire is overall, and the more powerful the Thalmor become. The only winning party with the Dragonborn not succeeding in this endeavor would be the Thalmor, though probably only momentarily. The end of the world would eventually reach the magical shores of the Somerset Isles, though of course that being mainly a Nordic myth, doubtful they would understand its real danger. Probably also worth mentioning for the side of the Greybeards that if they actually succeeded in fomenting peace, then they would be succeeding in not only their creed, but to also Paarthurnax, their leader. But with all of those things in mind, the Dragonborn set out in his new quest to convince these parties to have this conversation. Now, we have talked a little bit about Ulfric's Stormcloak and his quest for the unification of Skyrim. However, we haven't quite worked on General Tullius as of yet. Now, if you remember back in the beginnings of this story, he was present in order to personally see to the execution of Ulfric back in Helgen. See, he is the military governor of Skyrim, which poses a collection of interesting dilemmas and questions. The main one being, well, who actually rules Skyrim? Now, in a perfect world, if none of this nonsense was happening, then you would have what the Nords call a High King. He or she would be considered the leader of Skyrim, as all the Jarls of the province swear fealty to him or her. Now, typically the position of High King is either for life or until abdication, and the main way to become one is essentially through a hereditary process, meaning the firstborn of the High King will become the new High King. Now, the actual coronation process involves what the Nords call a moot. A moot is a meeting between all of the Jarls in Skyrim, where they actually get to vote who becomes the new High King. Like I mentioned before though, it is basically hereditary, so 99% of the time the Jarls will simply vote for the first son or daughter for the deceased king, for really no reason other than tradition. I did say that the Nords are a very, very traditional people. Now, to select a new Jarl, it is in some ways similar and in many, many ways different. First and foremost, the firstborn will always get dibs on the throne. That much hasn't changed. However, if there is no descendant, then the one who gets to choose who becomes Jarl is the Empire. That's right. Those all the way over in the Imperial City in Cyrodiil actually get to choose who becomes Jarl in such an event. So, as you can see, the influence that the Empire has in Skyrim politics is actually quite large. They get to choose who becomes Jarl, and the Jarls get to choose who becomes High King. One of the biggest reasons why Ulfric Stormcloak always believed that not just the High King, but many of the Jarls were actually always puppets of the Empire. Now, rules in the entirety of the kingdom that the Empire consists of are made by a ruling body called the Elder Council. Jarls sometimes have a place in this council, and the High King always does. So Skyrim does possess a lot of leeway when it comes to voting and enacting laws in the entirety of the Empire, to be fair. Now let's get back to the story a little bit. The High King of Skyrim was a man named Torrig. However, he was murdered a little bit before the beginnings of this story by Ulfric Stormcloak. That was the main reason why this.
Ulfric Stormcloak, Some here in Helgen call you a hero, but a hero doesn't use a power like the voice to murder his king and usurp his throne.
Is said at the beginning of the story. See, the Nords have a very ancient tradition where a Jarl can challenge the High King for leadership of the province. A challenge that cannot be refuted as long as it is made within the High King's halls and in front of his entire court. All of those requisites which were actually met by Ulfric. He challenged the High King and killed him, as it was Nordic tradition. Now, normally a moot would convene now in order to decide who becomes the High King, but Ulfric refuses to participate, as he figured Torik's now widow Elisif would be the one becoming High Queen. So what he's doing now instead is conquering hold after hold in order to essentially threaten them into voting for him. This means that currently Skyrim has no High King or Queen to rule them. And because of that, General Tullius was sent by the Empire to organize and rule in what you could define as kind of martial law. Though he really only rules in matters pertaining to the military, leaving the day-to-day affairs to Jarl Elisif, whom the Empire considers the legitimate inheritor of the title of Queen. In conclusion, Skyrim's civil war is a match between General Tullius, the master tactician, and Ulfric Stormcloak, a legendary warrior with the power of the voice. And it was these very people that the Dragonborn needed to convince to lay down their weapons for the goodness of the region. But how often does goodness and self-sacrifice come into play in these negotiations? The Dragonborn actually managed to convince these two individuals to attend the meeting. Ulfric just out of sheer respect for the Greybeards, and Tullius, well, more just out of being generally a reasonable guy.
Jarl Ulfric, General Tullius, this council is unprecedented. We are gathered here at the Dragonborn's request. I ask that you all respect the spirit of High Hrothgar, and do your best to begin the process of achieving a lasting peace in Skyrim. Who would like to open the negotiations?
Yes, let's get down to it. We want control of Markarth. That's our price for agreeing to a truce.
So that's why you're here, Ulfric? You dare to insult the Greybeards by using this council to advance your own position?
Jarl Elisif.
General, this is outrageous. You can't be taking this demand seriously. I thought we were here to discuss a truce.
Elisif, I said I'd handle it.
As for you, General Tullius, I see now that Galmar was right. Talking to the Empire is just as useless as ever. If you think you can hold Markarth, you're as deluded as your Emperor when he signed away our freedom to the Thalmor. Skyrim will never again bow to your false empire. Let's go, Galmar. I should have listened to you in the first place.
You always were a fool, Ulfric. You're no better at diplomacy than you are in the battlefield.
Stop! Are you so blind to our danger that you can't see past your petty disagreements? Here you sit arguing about nothing, while the fate of the land hangs in the balance.
Is he with you, Delphine? If so, I advise you to tell him to watch his tongue.
He is with me, and I advise you both to listen to what he has to say before you do anything rash.
Don't you understand the danger? Don't you understand what the return of the dragons means? Alduin has returned, the World Eater. Even now he devours the souls of your fallen comrades. He grows more powerful with every soldier slain in your pointless war. Can you not put aside your hatred for even one moment in the face of this mortal danger?
A very pretty speech. But what does
Shut
it have
up.
to do with the...
If he's right about Alduin, we both have just as much to lose here, Tullius. Remember that. Now, back to the matter at hand.
The meeting went as well as it could have, and in a lot of ways as expected. General Tullius was respectable and diplomatic, whereas Ulfric was fiery and explosive. Some concessions had to be made, and a lot of land was traded between the two groups, but in the end, the ceasefire was enacted.
It seems we may have an agreement. Jarl Ulfric, General Tullius, these are the terms currently on the table. Markarth will be handed over to Ulfric's forces, Jarl Igmund will step down, and Thongvor Silverblood will become the Jarl of Markarth. The Stormcloaks will withdraw from the rift, allowing Imperial troops unhindered access. Jarl Leila Lawgiver will step down, and Maven Blackbriar will become the Jarl of Riften. Falkreath will be turned over to Ulfric, and Dengir of Stoon will return as Jarl. You both agree to this?
The Sons of Skyrim will live up to their agreements, as long as the Imperials hold to theirs. What about you, Elisif? Are these terms to your liking? Speak up! I'm sure General Tullius is waiting to do your bidding.
I have nothing to say to that murderer. General, you've proven yourself a good friend to Skyrim. I continue to trust that you will do your utmost to safeguard our interests.
Thank you, Jarl Elisif. I appreciate your loyalty. The Empire can live with these terms, yes, for a temporary truce, until the dragon menace is dealt with. After that, Ulfric, there will be a reckoning. Count on it.
Come on, Delmar. We have a lot of work to do.
Having debated long enough, screamed at each other for long enough, the ceasefire was enacted and all parties were as happy as they could be by the end. Now it was time for the Dragonborn's plan to begin, to attempt to imprison a dragon and coerce it. Thankfully, while the peace talks were being prepared, Esbern had been hard at work at finding a dragon to subdue. Using the draconic knowledge found at Skyhaven Temple, and cross-referencing the map that we found at the beginning in Blickfall's Barrow, Esbern had found the name of a dragon currently under the command of Alduin. A dragon named Odahviing. It had seemed that by merely pronouncing its name out loud, the Dovahkiin could summon the dragon. See, dragon names are shouts in and out of themselves, which would allow the Dragonborn to produce some of that innate magic recorded in them. Especially now that Alduin was defeated, no dragon could ever resist the calling of the Dragonborn for a challenge. But before he enacted his plan, a very sad and unfortunate course of events would unfold, for during their visit to High Hrothgar in the Throat of the World, the Blades had found out who the real leader of the Greybeards was. They had found that Paarthurnax was a dragon. As I explained before, the Blades are dragon killers, first and foremost, and the biggest reason that dragons were basically extinct was because of them. Coming from a place of hatred and revenge, Delphine gave the Dragonborn an ultimatum. He was to kill Paarthurnax as revenge for his mistreatment of humans back before the Dragon War. The ultimatum being if the Dragonborn refused, then the Blades would not help him anymore. Now, this is one of the more touching and deep moments in this story. Truthfully, we actually don't know if the Dragonborn did off with Paarthurnax or if he allowed him to live. That is a part of the story that maybe one day we will know, but what Paarthurnax had to say in the matter as a response to knowing that the Blades wanted him dead was rather inspiring.
The Blades are wise not to trust me. Only Khan Niov. I would not trust another Dova. Dov Walan Farel. We were made to dominate. The will to power is in our blood. You feel it in yourself, do you not? I can be trusted. I know this. But they do not. Only Khan Niov Dova. It is always wise to mistrust a Dova. I have overcome my nature only through meditation and long study of the way of the voice. No day goes by where I am not tempted to return to my inborn nature. Zimgrifhorvut se suyech. What is better, to be born good or to overcome your evil nature through great effort?
To overcome your evil nature through great effort. It must have been very difficult. We know that he hated Alduin, for Alduin saw himself as a god, which of course can be difficult for another dragon to swallow, knowing full well that Akatosh is the real god. We also know that the goddess Kynareth commanded Paarthurnax to help the humans by teaching them to shout like dragons do, but we don't know if the command was forceful, if she controlled Paarthurnax and made him do it, or if she simply asked in kind and he accepted. Maybe the goddess Kynareth saw the good inside Paarthurnax and that's why she knew to ask him. Or maybe he knew that Alduin was going to fall and fail, and he chose the winning side. Regardless, to fight your own nature, regardless of whatever that nature is, must be extremely difficult. Imagine avoiding eating, even though your entire body commands you to. You know yourself how difficult it is not to scratch when your body itches. All those little emotions. I have great respect for this dragon and what he stands for. Any fight as hard as his must be admired. I like to think personally that the Dragonborn did not kill him. But we do know that there was a spark of evil inside of the Dragonborn after taking in that knowledge pertaining to Dragonrend. There is massive hatred towards dragons now inside of his heart. A lot of it being aimed at Paarthurnax, for those humans would have hated him too. Never forget that. The Greybeards warned the Dragonborn to avoid taking in such hatred. Poetic it might be that by allowing him to learn the word of power that their master would pay the price for it. What we do know is that next the Dragonborn set his eyes towards Dragon's Reach in Whiterun to challenge Odahviing and entrap him. Jarl Balgruuf had prepped the balcony and readied his men for the Dragon Call. This was going to be tricky because the Dragonborn needed to bait the creature into coming inside of the hall, directly below the harness. See, Dragon's Reach is famous in Skyrim, but it was the place where Olaf One-Eye, High King of Skyrim at the time, captured the dragon Numinex. But this actually happened hundreds of years after the Dragon War, after Alduin had been sent forward into the future and the dragons defeated and mostly killed. This means that virtually no dragon that exists today is aware that this trap even exists, whereas Paarthurnax does, since he lived in Skyrim at the top of the throat of the world this entire time. This made it a little bit simpler than it could have been, as Odahviing pushed through in his anxiousness to fight the Dragonborn, and in the end, got caught in the harness. Interestingly enough, Paarthurnax's conclusion on the state of dragonkind after Alduin's defeat proved certain, as Odahviing exclaimed there was indeed doubt between the ranks of Alduin's dragons. They questioned Alduin's voice, and in response, his authority to rule over them. This, combined with the fact that it is very difficult to find something dragons hate more than being incarcerated, allowed the Dragonborn to form a kind of a pact with this Dova. In exchange for information on where Alduin was located, then would the dragon be spared the consumption of his soul. A deal made rather quickly. It had seemed that Alduin had escaped into Sovngarde of all places, the godly realm of the ancient Nords, their heaven. Spectacular really that the power of Alduin seemingly knew no bounds, and allowed him the privilege of not just entering the sacred realm of divinity, but the reason he was there in the first place wasn't to actually run from the Dragonborn, but to devour the spirits of the dead, a process that granted him vigor and strengthened him. Odahviing had shared that the door that Alduin was using to pass through these realities was found atop an ancient dragon cult temple called Skuldafn, a place only accessible by dragons, since it was found atop the eastern mountains and not accessible by foot, and hence a new deal was made. If the Dragonborn released Odahviing and allowed him to go free, then he would show the Dragonborn the location and personally fly him there. We are finally entering the last chapter of the Dragonborn story. With no power left for him to obtain, with no information left for him to gather, all that was left was for him to make his way through the temple, to find his courage, and to fight through the hordes of dragons and draugrs, all the way through to the very top where the door to Sovngarde was located. And it wasn't easy. The draugrs found in this temple were by far the strongest that the Dragonborn had fought so far, for they were favored by the dragons. They were granted the power of the voice by their dragon overlords for their servitude and loyalty, which made them extreme combatants. The dragons were ferocious, for they were defending their god and their leader. But successfully, the Dovahkiin persevered. He found at the very perch that the last dragons in servitude to Alduin had relented their assault, for they had understood the power of his voice and his unquestionable prowess versus that of Alduin. His last challenger was, in fact, the leader of the complex, not a dragon, and more than just a draugr, an entity that we would call a dragon priest. If you remember from earlier in the story, the dragon priests were the leaders of the human kingdoms of Skyrim and Admora back in the days before days. Since the dragons enjoyed being superior but did not enjoy the ruling and the political aspects that were attached to it, they allowed certain loyal humans to rule in their stead. These humans were granted enormous power through magical items crafted by the very dragons. Sometimes these would come through armor and staffs, but most of the time they would come through dragon masks. These artifacts of untold power gave the dragon priest the ability to govern with an iron fist. Nakreen, the dragon priest, had been commanded by Alduin to protect the gate into Sovngarde, but he was no match for the Dragonborn. Upon using his key staff to open the portal, the Dragonborn had accessed the one place where every single Nord wanted to go to, the Nordic heaven of Sovngarde. Noble Nord, remember these words of the Horrorfather. Fear not the specter of death, for he is the herald of glory and your guide to great Sovngarde. The Dragonborn wasn't in Skyrim anymore. He wasn't in Tamriel anymore, not even on the same planet. He had traveled through realities and entered the magical realm of Aetherius, known as the Immortal Plane. It was the birthplace of all the gods, where Magica, the magic this story originates from. It is the place where it is believed that all the souls of the dead come from, and the location of all the different heavens. In this case, he was in a plane created specifically by Shor, who is known as the human god, an ancient god who physically walked the earth of Tamriel and fought in actual real wars with humans, but was eventually defeated by the other gods and killed. He made a covenant where he would reward the descendants of his warriors with eternal joy and merriment for having fought by his side during the beginnings of time. Those descendants were the ancient Nords, so as long as those Nords kept the traditions of fighting for what they believed in and dying for their causes, they would be rewarded richly by their patron by coming here.
Turn back, traveler. Terror waits within this mist. Many have braved the shadowed veil, but vain is all courage against the peril that guards the way. Near Giant's Gap, in the gloom before dawn, we marched unsuspecting into the Imperial's trap. Then we stood and fought, our shield wall defending, until by dawn's light the Legion's ranks wavered. But I never knew if Night's End brought victory, a swift flying arrow to Sovngarde carried me.
However, things were not as they seemed when the Dragonborn walked through these sacred grounds. Alduin had created a mist, a special magical mist that entrapped the souls of the dead that wandered into it. It would prevent the souls from ever finding the end of the path, the entrance to Shor's halls, and it would prevent them from escaping as well. The perfect spell for Alduin to devour them, one by one, as they laid there helplessly. The Dragonborn, however, wasn't dead, so the magics of this mist did not affect him like it did to them, and he found the way to the end. See, he couldn't fight Alduin under these conditions, as the mist prevented the Dragonborn from seeing the sky, and without seeing Alduin he couldn't fight him. But not all was lost, for Shor's halls lay there at the end of the Whalebone Bridge, a place filled with heroes of old and ancient Nordic warriors. Warriors that the Dragonborn surmised would be more than happy to fight once more for the salvation of their brethren. An old champion of old called Soon guarded the bridge, however. he who was known to be the Thane of Old Shore when he was a god and walked the earth. He is venerated as the god of trials against adversity in the ancient Nordic pantheon, represented as the whale god. His job to test the mettle of every single Nord that wants to pass through the bridge in order to get to heaven. It is believed that this was one of the unique moments in the Dragonborn's life when he was truly tested, outside of his encounters with Alduin. In any case, Tsune recognized the brawn of the Dovahkiin and allowed him entrance. Now, inside of what is called Halls of Valor, the spirits of the Nords dance and sing and eat and fight for all eternity. The magics of the hall prevent anyone inside from feeling boredom, as well as dulling the pain of combat, making this place the perfect eternity for a Nord. Now, most Nordic heroes that you can find mentioned within Skyrim can be found here, including those from books and stories. However, their stories did not affect that of the Dragonborn. Instead, our story will focus on a few selected individuals, the first being Ysgramor. See, everything that means to be a Nord basically comes from this one individual. He was the main Nordic leader to sail from the ancient continent of Anmora to actually settle in Skyrim, which many people attribute as the first man who actually set foot in the whole of Tamriel. He also was the inventor of writing for the humans, transcribing Nordic speech into runes for everyone to understand and read. There is literally no more famous and legendary Nordic warrior than Ysgramor, and he was the first one to welcome the Dragonborn into Shore's Hall. It had seemed that there were indeed warriors capable and willing to bring the fight to Alduin, in order to safeguard all the souls that were being devoured by him. These warriors turned out to be the very same heroes from old who battled Alduin back in the Dragon War, those who actually ended up inadvertently teaching the Dragonborn the Dragon-Dren shout. Gormlaith Goldenhilt, Hakon One-Eye, and Feldir the Old. They had failed at actually defeating Alduin in the past, and using an Elder Scroll, they sent him into the future. But now that Alduin was at their doorstep in heaven, it was their time to end their failure once and for all. The mist still proved to be a problem for these warriors, as fighting Alduin within it would be a deadly proposition. But now, instead of simply having the Dragonborn being the only user of the voice, we had four. And with their power, they cleared the sky of this mist. Their combined voice was stronger than Alduin's, as they screamed at each other back and forth. Alduin convoking the mist over and over while the tongues shouted it away. Exhausted and without no other recourse, the dragon swooped in, and combat began.
For Skyrim! For shore!
One of Alduin's strongest abilities is called Meteor Storm, a special shout only Alduin seems to know and be able to learn, which summons enormous meteors from the sky to destroy the earth. It is believed that a version of this spell is what Alduin uses in order to completely swallow and destroy the world. Avoiding these meteors while also dodging the incredible fires of Alduin's maw and keeping the other tongues alive was more than even the Dovahkiin could handle. As the battle progressed, the tongues fell under the might of Alduin, leaving his destruction solely at the hands of the Dragonborn. But at the very doors of heaven, in the sanctious realm of the gods, in front of every conceivable hero known to man, the Dragonborn slew the Devourer of Worlds and ended his realm of tyranny before it even began. So, What happened to the Dragonborn, you ask? Did he stay in heaven? Did he return to live the rest of his life in peace, knowing he had done his duty? Did he rule Skyrim as the new High King? Or did he join the Dark Brotherhood, a clan of murderers for pay? Well, there are a few things we do know. The Dragonborn was sent back to the world of the living by Tsune, where he belonged, at least until the moment of his death. Sent all the way to the top of the throat of the world, where all the dragons were perched, not only to pay homage to the Dragonborn, but to celebrate of Alduin's defeat.
Sorot fur Kanaran. Vakin los Octavakrid.
Alduin is dead, they screamed. We are free, they clamored. Happy for Alduin's death they all were, except for one, the one maybe you wouldn't expect not to be. The betrayer, the one who helped us actually achieve this goal. Parthurnax.
So, it is done. Alduin Dilon. The eldest is no more. He who came before all others, and has always been. Happy? No, I am not happy. Zehmahi lost Ondul Bormahu. Alduin was once the crown of our father Akatosh's creation. You did what was necessary. Alduin had flown far from the path of right action in his Pachlok, in the arrogance of his power. But I cannot celebrate his fall. Zutiraz ach ochma. He was my brother once. This world will never be the same. I am glad you believe that. At least it will continue to exist. Griklos line. Even I cannot see past time's ending to what comes next. Nid korav zin dinos ketid. We must do the best we can with this world. But I forget myself. Crosis, solos midfadon. Melancholy is an easy trap for a Dova to fall into. You have won a mighty victory, Shahroch Kondrach. One that will echo through all the ages of this world for those who have eyes to see. Savor your triumph, Dovahkiin. This is not the last of what you will write upon the currents of time. Goran, I feel younger than I have in many an age. Many of the Dovahe are now scattered across Kizal. Without Alduin's lordship, they may yet bow to the Vazen, rightness of my Thum. But willing or no, they will hear it. Fare thee well, Dovahkiin.
When this story is told, there's always one detail that gets forgotten. In fact, the most important detail. The Dragonborn did indeed defeat Alduin, more so than that he killed Alduin, but he did not absorb Alduin. Many believed, including yourself possibly, that the one edge that the Dragonborn had over this demigod that the other tongues didn't was the fact that he could permanently end Alduin, forevermore, by absorbing him. But when the time was right, when Alduin's flesh exploded and burned, his soul actually flew into the heavens, back to Aetherius. The Dragonborn did not absorb him. Now that was possibly the will of the gods. Maybe one day he will come back to truly end the world. I mean, the world does have to end at some point, right? But what about the story? Where does it actually end? What did he end up doing after all that? Well, some say a new Elder Scroll resurfaced, one bearing portents of darkness, a world without the sun where vampires ruled over all. But that is a story for another day. The patrons for this story were Dylan Baker, Toby Oliver, and Alex Fitchie, whom I thank for helping support me in this quest. Like them, join me in Patreon and help me bring these stories to life like many of you already do. This was the tale of Elder Scrolls Skyrim as seen by the eyes of the Dragonborn, a mortal blessed by the gods with the soul and mind of a dragon in his quest to save the world against Alduin, the World Eater. Meet you again in the next tale.